Hi everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Karina Orozco and I'm coming from the Warner Freedom in Chicago, Estados Unidos. Um, and I'm going to be talking a bit about our experience incorporating rare and threatened tree species in restoration efforts in the tropics. I'm just going to see what I'm talking about. So the State of the World's Trees Report came out in 2021, and it was a major publication in tree conservation. Um, it essentially sought to assess the conservation status of all the tree species on the world, and it got pretty close. There were 60,000 in total assessed, but it was also found that almost one third of all tree species on the planet are threatened with some sort of extinction. And just for comparison's sake, in comparison to animal species, this is twice the total number of threatened reptiles, birds, amphibians, and mammals on the planet. But all of us coming from Botanic Gardens know that we're in a really unique position to address some of these contributing threats. We work with really talented researchers who do all sorts of different plant science. We have access to living collections to study and for ex situ conservation. And we also have the opportunity to engage with the public and try to promote education on these topics. But the distribution of all of this knowledge and capacity presents another problem. So this map was published in a paper by Westwood and colleagues in 2020, and it essentially seeks to compare the distribution of botanic gardens in the world with global biodiversity hotspots. And those are highlighted in orange. And so the green points on the map are all the botanic gardens that are located outside of those hotspots, whereas the red are located within them. And this dichotomy is known as the biodiversity paradox, where all of this knowledge and these resources and overall well-documented historical knowledge of plants are located in the global north, but the species are located in abundance in the global south. And that's why collaborations across institutions, regions, countries are so important, which it seems like all of you here already know and are on board with, if not already putting it into practice. But in our conservation efforts, we should share that wealth and support the botanic gardens and arboreta that are smaller in these regions and might not have the capacity to do so on their own. And that idea guides a lot of our work in the Global Tree Conservation Program at the Morton Arboretum. Like I said, we're located in the United States, in Chicago, and our mission is to prevent the extinction of tree species through global collaboration. And as an institution in the US Midwestern region, we have a focal taxa as an arboreta, which is Quercus or oaks. And that's because these are really important keystone species, not just in our region, but across the world. And to this end, we run some other initiatives out of our program, such as the Global Conservation Consortium for Oak, and more recently, the IUCN Center for Species Survival of Trees. And both of these bring together networks of people to prevent the extinction of tree species. And so today I want to talk about kind of a comprehensive conservation research project that I've been involved with in my program, along with our collaborators in Latin America. And it's about conserving cloud forest species, but more specifically, this endangered oak, Quercus insignis. And it doesn't have a charming common name, so I'll just go with Quercus insignis. But this is an endangered species, and it's threatened by deforestation for agriculture, urbanization, and it's it's in a very rare habitat, tropical montane cloud forest, that some of our colleagues here have talked about, which hosts hundreds of species of other plants, animals, and insects. And members of our team have been studying this species since 2018, previously in Mexico with our collaborators at UNAM and Instituto Ecología AC in Veracruz, Mexico. But in 2020, we were awarded a National Geographic Explorers Grant to study the species in a restoration ecology context in Costa Rica. And the larger objective that we proposed in this grant was to develop a conservation action plan for the species at the national level. And the reason that we chose Costa Rica for our study region has a lot to do with the results of this study done by our colleague Melissa Naranjo Bravo at UNAM. Melissa analyzed the genetic connectivity of Quercus insignis populations across Latin America, and she also predicted their resilience under different climate change scenarios with ecological niche modeling. So as you can see, redder, warmer colors indicate higher levels of connectivity between populations. And even in this most intense climate change scenario that Melissa ran, Costa Rica and Panama stand out as having connected populations. And so that's why these countries are so important for the conservation of this species, because even under the most intense climate change model that we could use, they still maintain these relatively stable populations. And so once we were in the region, we found alliances in the NGOs, Asociación Ambiental Finca Cántaros and OSA Conservation. And both of them were already interested in restoring tropical cloud forests. And so we set up a tree nursery at Finca Cántaros, and we conducted germination trials for seeds that we collected from the species. And we sought to test the effects of 3 different variables on germination, which were mother tree, light, and container type. And OSA nursery staff collected this data over a period of 3 months. And I think this germination curve that we created kind of nicely illustrates the main takeaway of this study. These orange lines down here represent acorns that were collected from one mother tree A, and the darker lines are from mother tree B. And the shades just represent whether seeds, were grown under full sunlight or a 50% shade mesh. And you can see that based on mother tree, the germination rates are grouped together. And so this posed some different possibilities that were interesting for us to consider. We could have collected seeds from mother tree A that had fallen earlier and were on the ground longer than those from mother tree B, emphasizing the importance of phenology when collecting seed for your species that you're seeking to restore. Or mother tree A and B could have just had intrinsic genetic differences that led to this germination rate difference. And we continued working with OSA Conservation. As I mentioned, they have a really robust restoration program. And so at the time that we were put in contact, they were and are still working on this project called Ridge to Reef. And it essentially seeks to restore and maintain biodiversity in the Amistosa biological corridor in southern Costa Rica. And I'll point that out on the map in a second. But we were kind of able to slip into this project and transplant Quercus insignis seedlings into 6 different restoration sites that OSA had already established with local farmers and landowners. And so myself, along with OSA conservation restoration staff, went into the field 6 and 12 months after transplant, and we collected survival and growth data from around 300 seedlings. And here is the map of the study region, just to better orient you. And as I said, the Amistosa biological corridor runs from around here, sorry, my hand is shaking, to the coast. So it's ranging from the coast to the highlands in southern Costa Rica, where we're doing our study. And these are what the restoration sites look like, just so you can have an idea. Some of them are more forested than others, with remnant cloud forest patches, as these were previously intact cloud forests that had been converted to pasture. And some of them were more open with less canopy cover on steep inclines, like the bottom middle picture. And what we basically sought to answer with this data was what site characteristics specifically contribute to the highest rates of survival and growth for the species. And this bar plot shows the average relative increase in stem diameter across the 6 sites. And this was just one metric of growth that we used when looking at these seedlings to assess how they were doing in the field. And I'll note that the sites are arranged in order of elevation from lowest on the left to highest on the right. And so there is a positive trend for all of them. And you can see that site 4, which is at about 1,300 meters elevation, had the highest average increase in stem diameter over the 6 months. I'm going to skip this one. I don't think I have enough time. But I also, complementary to this science, took some root samples from seedlings to test for the presence of mycorrhizal colonization. And I harvested these samples from 4 to 5 seedlings from each site at time 1, and then cleaned them off and was eventually able to clear and stain them using ink in the lab. And I then counted the number of root tips and calculated the percent of them that were colonized by ectomycorrhizal fungi. And I have yet to deeply analyze this data, but it seems like overall that there was colonization in all of the samples that I took. Those levels of colonization varied, but like I said, I am hoping to further analyze this data. And then what we learned from all of this science essentially was that there was a difference in the germination rates because of mother trees, but seedlings in the nursery, or I'm sorry, acorns in the nursery seem tolerant to a variety of conditions. And what we found also indicated to us the importance, like I said, of monitoring phenology in a species when you yourself are collecting the seed to restore it eventually. And also from our restoration experiment, we found that Crocus insignis in general seems to have a high potential to be restored because it's established itself well and began to grow since being transplanted into the field. And additionally, there was ectomycorrhizal colonization, which is beneficial for a variety of reasons, but this needs to be further studied. And then in addition to the science, we also try to be in community and build community with our partners. So we, throughout the process of this project, we're always trying to learn from and support the conservation professionals that were already in the area. So in 2022, we hosted a local workshop with themes of tree conservation and identification in the field. And additionally, I worked with partners to create these resources. There's an example on the right that were species ID guides made for 12 different cloud forest species. And as I said, monitoring of trees is important. So these had information about species, phenology, distribution, ecology, etc. And we were just talking about how a lot of times these resources are not made accessible to people in these regions, so they are in Spanish. And overall, this was just a really great event to be able to exchange knowledge and resources with the people who made our project so successful. And then, as I mentioned, we had the objective of developing a conservation action plan for the species. And to do this, in August 2023, we organized a conservation action planning workshop in Costa Rica in person. And this was following the IUCN's Conservation Planning Specialist Group's methodology. We invited 35 participants who were all able to come, and they represented a variety of sectors: academia, government, local and national, and NGOs. And over a span of 2 days, we were able to collaboratively draft 5 goals that outlined the conservation action plan for the species, and they related to seed collection, ex situ conservation, and communication of all of this research. And we tried to make sure that a diverse group was represented at this event. So we covered lodging for everyone, and we covered transportation when possible to make sure that women, students, and people from local organizations could attend. So now, 4 years from the start of the project and several chaotic global events later, we are finalizing this conservation action plan and have sent it to our partners, the draft that we have, for their approval. And we're looking to assign the actions to the different institutions that were involved. And the success of this project had also led us to apply for more funding to expand it to Monteverde and Juan Castro, which are regions in the north and central parts of the country, respectively. And finally, we've begun conversations with new collaborators in Mexico and other countries in Central America to study the species there and have a comprehensive understanding of its restoration ecology across its entire range. And I think basically what I want to say with this slide is that since we are a newly designated IUCN Center for Species Survival, we hope to be able to do more restoration and conservation projects informed by science like this one, and to work with more people in these biodiversity hotspots, like so many of you that are here from your Botanic Gardens. And I would just like to acknowledge and thank all of our partners that were involved in this study, and that made it possible and such a success. And I'd like to thank all of you for your attention.
We do have time for some questions. Quercus? Cloud Core?
Thank you. Hi, Cristobal Sanchez from Mexico. We just acquired this species from Veracruz in the Vallarta Botanical Garden, but this species also occurs in Jalisco, and we are looking for the best places to finally establish these trees. So maybe if you have some recommendations that you could give us later about the management. And I saw that you have a infographic picture with all kind of details, but we can collaborate on and be included as part of the network. We are already guardians also, but we need to keep working on the rescue of this Chicalaba tree, the insignia.
Thank you, Cristobal. Yes, we should definitely get in touch after this and collaborate more. I know we already talked about having Marisela in common, who is a really incredible ecologist and conservationist in Mexico. But I do want to mention that I said that we have created resources in Spanish that are related to this species and others. So if you want to look for those, they should all be available on the GCCO website, Global Conservation Consortium for Oak, which is actually now on the BGCI website. But yeah, if anyone is interested in that, I also helped publish a propagation manual for the species in Spanish. So yeah, look for me if you would like access to it.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.